Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. We've had some new developments when it comes to emulation on Apple devices. In particular, we now have RetroArch available for the iPhone as well as the iPad. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set that up so that you can start playing your favorite retro games. Now, we've already had a major emulator drop on iOS before. This is going to be Delta. I made a video about that as well, but that one is more focused on Nintendo-based systems and really is only made for the iPhone right now. This one with RetroArch is going to give us a lot more games that we can play, and of course it's also going to work with the iPad, so that's pretty awesome. In fact, there's also an Apple TV version that's come out. I don't have an Apple TV just yet, but I do plan on making a video about that when I get one in the mail. Now, I kind of have a love and hate relationship with RetroArch. There are many things I love about it. The ability to implement things like different shaders and cheats, all of those will really elevate your emulation experience. But there are some bad aspects to it as well, including the fact that the user interface is not very intuitive, and it does take quite some time to get spun up. So in this video, we're going to focus specifically on getting started, although I do have a full written guide and RetroArch video guide that I will also leave linked down below. So I would recommend following this video just to get started, and then if you want to dip your toes a little bit further in, then check out those other guides. Anyway, we've got a lot of ground to cover here, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, let's start by talking about what systems you can emulate through RetroArch. And for this video, we're going to focus on the popular systems, and so these are the ones that you'll see here in this video. That'll include the Nintendo systems all the way up to Nintendo 64 and DS, but then also some Sega systems too, including Sega Genesis and Sega Saturn. Unfortunately, Sega Dreamcast is not available as a core with this platform. Other systems that we're going to test today include Sony PlayStation, as well as Final Burn Neo, which is going to allow us to play a lot of arcade games. Now that is not every system that can play on RetroArch. Here is the full list. I actually went through all of the available cores within the emulator, and this is them right here. So if you want to play any of these old systems like ZX Spectrum or Amiga or even Neo Geo, all of those are available here within this emulator. Also of note, PlayStation Portable does have a RetroArch emulation core, but there's also been the standalone PSP emulator available on iOS as well, so we will save that for a different video. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started by installing RetroArch on our device. I'm going to do this on my iPad just so we have more screen real estate, and I will do it through a direct video feed as well. First thing, go into the App Store and search for the word RetroArch, and it's going to be a free download, so just go ahead and download it here. The file size is pretty big, it's over 500 megabytes, but that's because every single emulator core is already installed on it. So really, once you make this one big download, you will have the entire app. Next, we're going to open up the app and initialize everything. Now I'm going to use a Bluetooth controller here, but you can also use the touchscreen if you would like. The first time you open it, it's going to extract the assets. You'll know it's done once the font gets a little bit cleaner looking. And now we're ready for our initial setup. And the first thing we're going to do is customize the look and feel of RetroArch. I don't really mind this initial look, but I think it's a little bit unintuitive, so I'm going to change it to something that just makes a lot more sense graphically. So we're going to press the right arrow 2 times to get into the settings menu. From there, we're going to scroll down until we find drivers, and then the first option within drivers is going to be the menu driver. That's just a fancy way of saying the skin that they're using within RetroArch. You've got 4 different options here, and they're all fine, but I prefer the one that's called XMB, or Cross Media Bar. This is going to look like an old PlayStation 3 menu, and I think it just looks a little bit more intuitive because it's both vertical and horizontal. Anyway, once you've selected that, you need to exit out of RetroArch and start it back up. The easiest way to do that is just to swipe up to kill the app and then jump back in. And now that we're back in, you can see that, yeah, it looks like a PlayStation 3. I think this is a little bit more intuitive. Now what we can do is scroll left and right to go through the different sections, and then within each of those sections we now have other submenus. And so this is what we're going to use for navigation throughout the rest of this video. So let's start with the initialization process. In the main menu, we're going to scroll down to Online Updater. Within here, you'll find a bunch of options that start with the word Update, so I recommend going through each of these and then pressing the A button to load them. This is going to download and install new assets and controller profiles and cheat databases and things like that. You only really need to do this that very first time, and then you can do it periodically if you would like, maybe once every couple months, but these objects don't really change too often, and so it's not one of those things you have to do all the time. Anyway, once those are done, we're going to go into the second menu, which is the settings section. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time here. Let's start by going into the user interface. Within here, we can go down to the on-screen notification section. And then within that, we can select notification visibility. And then from here, we can turn on the frame rate if we would like. It's going to show up on the top right corner and then show you whether or not the game is going to be running at full speed. Another thing related to the user interface is that when you start up a game, by default, it's going to show on-screen touch controls. And this will work out fine if you're trying to play a game in a pinch and you don't have a controller with you, but it can be distracting if you have a controller hooked up. So this is an easy fix within the user interface settings as well. Within here, scroll down to on-screen overlay, and then scroll about halfway down that menu. You'll see one that says hide the overlay when a controller is connected. Just go ahead and turn that on. And really that's it. That means that every time that you have a Bluetooth controller connected and you start up a game, you're not going to have to see the touchscreen controls. But if you want to play a game without a controller, those touchscreen controls will still appear. Next, we're going to go into the video settings because if you would like, you can turn on HDR. Basically, all iPhones past iPhone 13, as well as I think the iPad Pro 2021, all support HDR. And so it's up to you whether or not you want to use this, but this is where you would find it. Next, we're going to go into the input section, and if you're having any sort of issues with your buttons, maybe some are not showing up correctly, you'll want to go in here into RetroArch binds and then port 1 controls. And within here, you can assign your buttons however you would like. Now for most controllers, it's already automated and it usually will work pretty well, but if you run into any issues, this is where you would want to fix it. Now, if you scroll down a little bit more, you will find menu controls. This is where you can swap out the OK and cancel buttons within the RetroArch menu. So if you don't like the way that the A and B buttons are functioning within RetroArch, you can just swap them right here. And then finally, the most important part of inputs is something called hotkeys. These are going to be quick menu shortcuts that you can do without having to get back into the menu. Here's a little diagram I've made of all the most important hotkeys for me. The most important button will be your hotkey enable button. That's going to be select. After that, all the other buttons are going to function when you're pressing the hotkey enable button. So for example, if you want to show your frames per second, you would hold on to select and then press the Y button. And same thing here, if you want to save a state, you would press select and R1, and then if you want to load that save state, you would press select and L1. And if you wanted to jump into the RetroArch menu while in a game, you would press select and X, and then if you wanted to just close the game altogether, you would press select and start. So that's how hotkeys will work in this system, and so now let's set them up. First thing, when you get into this menu, you will see the hotkey enable button, so just assign this to select. From there, you can scroll down and find the other ones within the diagram and then assign them accordingly. So for example, under menu toggle, we're going to set this one to the X button. And same thing with close content, we will choose this to be the start button. And there are all sorts of other more complicated hotkeys you could set up as well, including adjusting the volume or potentially changing out your discs with multi-disc games, or even toggling out your shaders. Either way, here's another look at that diagram in case you just want to get the very basics. These are the ones that I always set up every time I'm setting up a new system. Okay, another setting that I think is pretty important is under saving. If you scroll down here, you can find auto save state and auto load state. This means that every time you close out of a game, it's automatically going to save where you were. And then when you start the game back up, it's going to go right back to that same spot. This can be super handy if you're just trying to jump in and out of your games pretty quickly. And then finally, another feature I think is worth considering are called retro achievements. You can find these within the achievements section of the settings menu. Now to get this set up, you'll have to go to retroachievements.org and then sign up for a free account. And I've had mine for about 4 years at this point, and I love it. It will track all of the retro games that you're playing as long as you have retro achievements signed in. And so it kind of works like trophies or achievements with PlayStation and Xbox, but with your retro games, and they're all made by the community. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, to get this going, you can go into the achievements section, then turn it on, and then insert your username and password that you used when you first signed up. After that, I do recommend also going down to hardcore mode and then turning this off. If you leave it on, that means you won't be able to use cheats or rewind or save states. So it'll really be up to you and how you want to play your retro games, but for me personally, I like my save states, so I turn this off. And that's really about it when it comes to those initial settings. So once you're done with all that, I would recommend going back to the main menu, then go down to configuration file and select save current configuration. It will actually autosave when you close out of the app, but it's always good to do it yourself as well. Okay, now that we've configured our settings, we've got a couple different things we need to do. The first is to add our games, and then we need to make playlists. And so we'll start by adding our games, and this can be a simple or complicated process depending on how familiar you are with Apple devices. In a nutshell, what you have to do is take your retro games and put them within the RetroArch folder. And that's because, as far as I can tell, RetroArch only has access to the files within its own folder on your device. So for example, if we go into the Files app on your phone or iPad, you will see a location that says on my iPhone or on my iPad. Go into there and you'll see a RetroArch folder. And if you open that up, there'll be another RetroArch folder, and then within that one, you will see a bunch of other folders. And essentially, this is the only place that RetroArch has access, so you have to put your retro games within here. And what I did is I just made a folder called ROMs, and then I put all my subfolders within here, one per system. And then of course within these folders, I put all my ROM files. Now, ROM files are copyrighted, so I'm not going to show you where to get them, but you're going to have to find them on your own. And getting these files onto your iPad can be pretty simple. There's one of two major ways. The first would be to put the games on the cloud, either on your iCloud Drive or maybe on Google Drive or Dropbox. From there, you can navigate to that folder on your iPhone or iPad and then download them directly onto your device. From there, you'll just need to copy and paste those files over into this ROM file within your RetroArch folder. Another way you could do it is to take a USB flash drive, then plug that into your iPhone or iPad, and then transfer them over directly. For me, I just put all my files onto my iCloud drive, then I downloaded them and then moved them over. And so it's a pretty simple process. You just have to go through the Files app to do it. So let me show you an example, starting with the Saturn folder. Here you can see I have 3 different files. They're all in CHD format, about 300 or 400 megs each. Now, one question you might have is what kind of file types are accepted by RetroArch? Often you'll see them in zip format, or sometimes you'll see them just in the direct ROM format. And there's actually a handy tool within RetroArch itself that will show you all the accepted file types. And it's pretty simple to check. You would go into Load Core and then find whatever emulator core you want to run. Let's use PlayStation 1 as our example. I'm going to use the PCSX rearmed core. Once you select the core, it's going to take you back to the main menu, then go into Information and then select Core Information. Now within here, it's going to tell you everything about this core, including the supported file extensions. And PlayStation is a great example because it will accept just about everything. Like with Sega Saturn, I prefer to use CHD files. These are going to be compressed files, so they take up less space, and I think they work great. Another thing you can check while in the core information section are which BIOS files are required, which you can see down here on the bottom. And we're going to talk about BIOS in a second, but yeah, you can see right here the listing of those that they want. And so really that's about it when it comes to setting up the emulator files themselves within RetroArch. It can be pretty complicated if you've never done emulation before. It's really just a matter of making sure you find the correct file format and then putting them in a folder that RetroArch can find. As another example here, if we go into my PlayStation 1 folder, you can see that I have 4 different games and they're all in CHD format. Now, just a second ago, I mentioned BIOS files. These are system files that are required for certain emulators to run properly. And RetroArch is going to look in a specific folder to find those BIOS files. And because we already have access to all the RetroArch folders, we should just put them directly in there. And so instead of putting them in your ROMs folder with everything else, I recommend putting them in the system folder, which you can see right here. And I've already added all of the requisite BIOS files that I personally like to use, and so let's go over them really quickly. The first 3 up top are for Sega CD in the different regions if you do want to play various games. Below that, we have the Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and Game Boy Color BIOS files. I like to add these because it adds the boot logo when you start up a game. After that, we have the MPR and then the Sega 101 bin files. These are used for Sega Saturn, and these are required. Next, we have the NeoGeo.zip file. You want to add this to both the system folder as well as your Neo Geo folder if you're going to have Neo Geo ROMs. After that, we have a PlayStation 1 BIOS, and then at the very bottom, we have these 3 that are used for TurboGrafx CD or PC Engine CD. Now I know I went through that pretty quickly, but here's a nice fancy slide with all those file names. So I would recommend maybe pausing here if you don't have these files, then Googling them and then adding them to your folder. And so really that's about it when it comes to adding your files to RetroArch. You want to make a ROMs folder to put all of your games and then put your BIOS files within the system folder. Now once we have that set up, let's go back into the settings section, then scroll all the way down to directory. And the first thing you'll see is that within system and BIOS, it's pointing to that system folder that we already put our BIOS files within. But the thing we need to change is within the file browser section. Select that, then RetroArch, and then select your ROMs folder. Then select use this directory and you are now good to go. So now that we've added our games, let's start adding playlists so that we can actually navigate through and boot them up. You'll find this on the far right side under a heading called Import Content. We'll start with the automatic scanning process, which will work for most systems, and then we'll also do a manual scan for a couple of the tricky ones. So first, we'll select Scan Directory. From there, it's going to take us to our ROMs folder, and let's pick one of these systems. Game Boy is a good example. Once we select that, you'll see on the bottom left, it'll say that the scanning of the directory is finished. If we back out into the main section and then scroll all the way to the right, you will now see there's a Game Boy section. And the cool thing here is that as you hover over each of these games, if you wait for a few seconds, it'll actually download the box art for the game as long as your game is named correctly. And so once you scroll through the games once, it'll initiate that download, and then if you go back to it, you should then see the box art. It looks pretty cool. So that in a nutshell is how to do a scan directory. So let's do a couple more of them. And this will work great for all these systems that have specific file name extensions. For example, Game Boy Advance, which has GBA games, and same thing with Game Boy Color. These ones use a GBC file extension. Now we're going to skip Genesis for now because it's a little bit more tricky, so let's go down to Nintendo 64 and then scan this one. And you can do the same thing for Nintendo DS and NES as well as Super Nintendo. Now the other systems can be more tricky because they use generic file extensions, so let's do manual scan for those. So within here, we have to manually choose a couple system parameters. So we'll start with system name. We're going to do Final Burn Neo. So I'm going to go down to Final Burn Neo arcade games. Next, under default core, I'm going to find the Final Burn Neo core, which is right there under arcade. And then finally, the third thing you want to do is the content directory. You need to point it to the Final Burn Neo folder. And once we've chosen that directory, we are now ready to actually do the manual scan. Now, one more advanced thing you can do is add an arcade DAT file. This is an XML file that will change the file names of these arcade games to match the actual game itself. And this is all explained in that RetroArch guide that I mentioned in the intro of this video, and so I will leave that link down below if you want to go a little bit further into it. For now, we're just going to keep it super simple, so we will do a start scan. And there we are. If we go and back out to the main section, then scroll to the right, we can see the Final Burn Neo section. And like I mentioned, the file names here are not going to reflect the exact name of the game. Instead, it's just going to be the name of the file. Okay, let's do a couple more manual scans just to make sure you've got the hang of it. So we'll go back into here, and this time under Content Directory, we're going to select Sega Genesis. And then same thing under System Name, we'll scroll down to Sega Mega Drive Genesis. And then finally, we need to select our default core. We've got a few options here when it comes to Genesis. I prefer Genesis plus GX, so that's the one I'm going to choose. And that's really it. We can select Start Scan, and we should be good. Let's do one more selection with PlayStation 1. We're going to change the content directory to our PS1 folder. And then under system name, we will scroll down until we find Sony PlayStation. Now, when we get to default core, it's going to be the same thing. We have a few different ones to choose from. I personally like the one called PCSX Rearmed. Once you've got those three taken care of, we're ready to start the scan. And then just do Sega Saturn and we'll be good to go. Okay, so here's a look at all of our playlists. We're actually done at this point. We can now scroll through these, and like I mentioned before, as long as your names are correctly labeled, you'll see the box art at some point. And essentially that's it. We've now set up RetroArch, we've now added our games, and then also set up our playlist. Those are the three things you really have to do. So now it's time for the fun stuff. We're going to start playing some games and see how everything works. Now there is still some more stuff to learn in terms of just configuring each of these systems to work perfectly, and so we'll go over that as we test each of these systems. We're going to keep going on the iPad for now, but we will do some iPhone testing here in a minute. I just like using this big screen. Now in terms of controllers, you could just use a standard modern controller like an Xbox or PlayStation controller. These are going to work fine. You would just connect these via Bluetooth to the iPad and everything should work automatically. However, for me personally, I really like to use this controller when playing retro games. It's called the 8BitDo SN30 Pro. This one has all the buttons I need, but it's also nice and compact and obviously reminds me of a Super Nintendo controller as well. Now the gray one that I have is a little bit of an older model, but they do have a couple nice transparent models now too. I'll leave links to each of these controllers down in the video description as well if you'd like to check them out. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started with our game testing. So I'm going to go through our playlist and then choose a game. Let's do Donkey Kong Land. Now when you first try to run the game, it's going to give you an option of all the cores that can play Game Boy. And it's really going to be up to you which one you want to use, but for me personally, I prefer Gambate, the first one on the list. Now, when the game starts up, there's a few things to notice. Number one, we're getting the boot logo, which means we have the BIOS installed. And then also on the top left, you can see that it's logged into Retro Achievements because it lets me know how many achievements I've unlocked. The third thing you may notice is that the game is playing in black and white, and you may want to add some colorizations. Let's do that first. We're going to press Select and X to bring up the RetroArch Quick menu, and then we're going to scroll down to Core Options. And for each of the emulator cores, these will look a little bit different. And the setting we want to change is under Game Boy Colorization. Change this to Internal. Once you've changed that, you can go into Internal Palette, and then there's a bunch of different colors you can choose from, like over 100, I think. We're going to stick with the default DMG one, but it's always fun to experiment with these options. Another thing I like to change within Gambate is under Interframe Blending. I like to change this to LCD Ghosting Accurate. That's going to add a little bit of ghosting to the screen to mimic what it was like on the original Game Boy. And now when we start up the game again, you can see that everything is a nice DMG green, but then also we've got a little bit of interframe blending or LCD ghosting. Now there's one more thing we can add to really take it over the edge, and that's going to be a shader. For this, we're going to go back into the RetroArch Quick menu, and then near the bottom, there's a shader section. Go ahead and turn this on, and then select Load Preset. From there, go into the shaders _ slang folder, and then for this one, we're going to navigate down to the handheld folder. My favorite shader is called LCD3X, so I'm going to scroll down until I find that, and then I'm going to select it. However, I find this one to be a little bit dark, so I'm going to scroll down into shader parameters, and then under brighten LCD, I'm going to change this to 8.0. And these are the standard settings I like to use with every Game Boy and Game Boy Color game. So I'm going to go into Save Preset, and then I'm going to select Save Core Preset. That means it's going to work for both Game Boy and Game Boy Color. And that's it. Now we can jump back into the game, and as you can see here, it is green. We've got a little bit of LCD ghosting, and we've got a nice grid overlay as well. So I'd say this is about as close as you can get to a huge Game Boy screen right now. I think it's pretty awesome. Now, if you want to close out of a game, if you remember, the hotkey is Select and Start. So if we do that, it's going to take us right back to the RetroArch menu. Now we can choose another game and then boot that from here. Let's go into Game Boy Color next. And the first time you run it, it's going to ask you which core you want to use. We're going to use the same Gambate core. And because we save that shader as a core preset, that means it's also going to work with Game Boy Color. And so yeah, we are well set up when it comes to Game Boy Color. We've got the boot logo, we've got retro achievements, and we even have the shader. So that's awesome. We got 2 systems knocked out. Let's try Game Boy Advance next. And same thing here, when you boot it up, it's going to ask you which core you want to use. I recommend MGBA. This one is also going to show you that boot logo as well as the retro achievements, but this is another system where you might want to add that LCD3X shader. So let's do that really quickly. We're going to go back into the RetroArch quick menu, then shaders, then turn on the shaders, then go down to load preset. And then I'm going to go really quickly through the handheld section and then the LCD3X preset. Finally, we'll go down to shader parameters, then brighten the LCD to 8.0. Then we'll go to Save Preset, and I'm going to select Save Content Directory Preset. That means that any Game Boy Advance game that I play, no matter the core, is going to have that shader. And that's it. Now we've got Game Boy Advance games working. Same thing. We've got the nice shader. Everything looks good. We've got retro achievements logged in. Yeah, we're good to go with this one as well. Okay, next we're going to jump up all the way to the Nintendo 64. We're going to start with Banjo-Kazooie. Now this one only has one core, so when it asks you which core, you know exactly which one to choose. And with Nintendo 64, you can add a shader if you'd like, but I think it works just fine as it is. But one thing we can test here is the fast forward function. So I can press select and R2, it's going to toggle on fast forward. And how fast it runs is going to depend on how powerful the system you're running. I have a 2nd generation iPad Pro, and so it's pretty zippy. This is really handy because the era of games for Nintendo 64 and like PS1, many of these didn't have skippable cutscenes. So if you just want to get into the action, you can fast forward through that old cutscene. Anyway, yeah, this is what Nintendo 64 looks like. As you can see, it's a 4x3 system, which is going to fill up most of the screen here with the iPad Pro because this is a 4x3 display as well. There might be a little bit of cropping just by the nature of Nintendo 64. That's why you're seeing some black borders, but it's still running in 4x3. Now here, one thing we can change is we can upscale the resolution with 3D games like Banjo-Kazooie. To do that, we can go into the RetroArch quick menu and then core options, and then go into the glide N64 section. Here you've got a couple different options when it comes to resolution. You've got it when playing games in 4x3, but then also when playing games wide. In fact, here you can also adjust the aspect ratio. By default, it's going to be 4x3, which works great with the iPad Pro. But if you're using an iPhone, you can change this to a different option, which is wide with the word adjusted within parentheses. That's actually going to turn on widescreen hacks. Let's go ahead and actually turn that one on here with the iPad so you can see what it looks like. And of note, you'll have to close out of the game and start it back up to see these changes take effect. And another thing worth noting is that when starting up a Nintendo 64 game, I found about half the time RetroArch will actually crash. This has been a problem with this core for years at this point, and so I'm not surprised that it's still there. And so if a Nintendo 64 game crashes RetroArch when you start it up, don't worry about it. Just go right back into it and then start the same game up. And chances are the second time you try it, it'll work. Now, as you can see here, it's set to 16:9, and so it's actually widescreen, but again, you have these big black bars on the top and bottom. So that'll be up to you which one you prefer. Would you like to see more of the screen at once using these widescreen hacks, or would you rather have something that fills up the entire screen? I think when it comes to playing Nintendo 64 games on the iPhone, if it supports widescreen hacks, it's definitely worth it. For example, Super Mario 64 is awesome in widescreen, and so this is really fun on the iPhone. But when it comes to the iPad, I would prefer not to have a wider resolution, so we're going to change this back to 4x3. I'm going to keep all these games upscaled to 1080p just because my device is powerful enough for it, but you can always figure it out based on the power of your phone or your iPad. Either way, yeah, that's how you would run Nintendo 64 games, and I think they look great. Now, another neat thing you can do within RetroArch is that you can set up cheats, and some of these are pretty awesome. Let's do it really quickly for Mario 64. We're going to press Select and X to get into the RetroArch quick menu, and then we'll scroll down until we find the cheat section. It's right above shaders. Now here we want to select Load Cheat File Replace. Next, scroll down until you find your system. We're going to go with Nintendo 64. and then you'll have to scroll down until you find your game. This can take a while depending on how far it is in the alphabet, but if you press the R2 button, it'll zip down to the next letter of the alphabet, so it can get pretty fast. Either way, once you find your game, go ahead and select it, and that'll bring you back to the main cheat menu. Now, if you scroll down, you can see that there are a bunch of cheat options. And so what I would recommend here is reading through these, and if any of these sound pretty fun, then turn them on. You can either just press right on the D-pad to turn it on automatically, or you can select the cheat and then scroll down to enabled and turn it on from here. And we're going to turn on this one called Giant Mario. I have no idea what this is going to do, but it sounds pretty fun. And after you've chosen all your cheats and turned them on, just go to Apply Changes. Now when we go back into the game, you can see I've got a Giant Mario, just as the cheat said. And so this can be a really fun way to breathe new life into your games. If you want invincibility or you want to jump higher, it's all going to be found within here. Okay, next let's try Nintendo DS. Now this is a pretty fun system as well. Now by default, these games are going to run in a top to bottom pattern. And I think that's going to be fine on the iPad. In fact, what you can do is just rotate the iPad and that way it plays a little bit more vertically. And so this ends up being a massive DS at this point. It's pretty awesome to play. Now, one thing of note, you can also upscale these games like we did with Nintendo 64, but bear in mind that the DS emulator is not very performant here on RetroArch, even with a super powerful system like an iPad. Either way, to set this up, we're going to go back into the RetroArch quick menu and then core options. And then within the graphics section, you will see an internal resolution. Now, like I mentioned, this is not a very performant core. So to make sure that every game plays smoothly, I usually just set it to a 2x resolution. And that's still going to look twice as good as the native resolution. So I think it looks pretty sharp. Either way, that's about it when it comes to Nintendo DS, but of note, when you're playing it on an iPhone, you'll probably want to change the options to be horizontal instead so you can play them wide like this. Okay, next let's try NES. There are a couple parameters I recommend changing with this one as well. To start, it's going to ask which core you want to use. I recommend using Nestopia. And once you have the game running, there's one thing you might notice is some flickering on the left and right. This is pretty common with a lot of older NES games. These portions of the screen used to be covered by a CRT television, so what we can do is get rid of those sections. For this, we'll open up the RetroArch quick menu, then go into core options, and then under video, you will see mask overscan. And all you want to do is change the left and right horizontal to 8 pixels. And for most games, that's going to be perfect. Now, while we're also in here, we can go down to emulation hacks and we can remove the sprite limit. That's going to remove flickering from older games. And then also we can change it to a 2x overclock for the CPU speed. That's going to reduce any slowdown that used to happen mid-game. Now, this is going to take away from the original experience of playing an NES game. If you want the flickering and slowdown like it used to be, then keep these off. Either way, this is now how Little Nemo is going to play on the NES. We've removed the flickering from the left and right. We also aren't going to have any flickering with the sprites, and then there's no slowdown either. So it's almost like an optimized way to play these games, although it is not quite true to the original. Next, we're going to try out Super Nintendo. This one is actually pretty well configured already. The major thing to note is that we have multiple cores to choose from, and the main ones are going to be BSNES and SNES 9X. Now, BSNES is a lot more accurate. It's going to give you a better representation of the original Super Nintendo game, but it does require more power. Now, Apple devices are generally pretty powerful, so I think that BSNES will probably work just fine, so I would recommend using that one if you can. And the games are going to look amazing on here. They're going to stretch out to the 4:3 display, and yeah, it's almost pixel perfect because we have such a high resolution on both the iPad and the iPhone. By the way, this is like the 12 or 12.9 inch iPad, and these games are massive. This is amazing to play these retro games like this. Okay, next up, let's try out Sega Genesis. Now, thankfully, this one does not require any additional configuration. It's just going to work awesome right out of the box. And while I didn't set up Sega 32X and Sega CD at the same time, it's the exact same process. So it's a very simple setup, and all these games are going to run wonderfully. This was the main 16-bit system I had growing up, and so I get a lot of nostalgia playing these old games like Sonic. Okay, so next we're going to move into Sega Saturn. This one is really exciting because this is a really hard system to emulate, but the emulator core they have within RetroArch is the Beetle core. This is my favorite among them. So provided you have the correct BIOS, these games should just boot right up and it's going to be awesome. Now, one thing of note here are the controls. For example, if you planned on using a game with analog sticks, it's not going to be set up perfectly right out of the gate. However, it's a pretty easy fix. Let's go back into the RetroArch quick menu, and now we're going to go into controls. We've got two major options here. Let's go down to the Port 1 controls, and under device type, we can change it from the regular Sega Saturn pad to the 3D pad. This one did come with an analog stick, and so if you set this up and the game supports it, you'll be able to just use this and it'll work fine. So for example, with this game, Nights into Dreams, it did support the 3D control pad, and so as a result, you can use your analog stick just like this. But let's say there is a game that doesn't support this control pad, but you still want to use the analog stick. Let me show you a trick for that, and this trick can be done for any of the other systems we've been talking about today. Back in the quick menu control section, we're going to change it back to a control pad, and then below that there's an option that says analog to digital type. And you want to change this to left analog. That means that any of the D-pad inputs are now also going to work with the left analog stick. And so it's kind of a cheating way of adding the digital inputs to an analog stick, but all the same, it's a great way to just really quickly be able to play any game with an analog stick if you'd like. And this can be done with a number of different systems. For example, I like playing the Super Nintendo version of Legend of Zelda with an analog stick as opposed to a D-pad, and so you can set that up this way as well. Now, another thing you can do is use shaders with the home console systems. Let's try this out with Saturn just to see how far we can push it. So we're going to go into the quick menu, then shaders, but this time we're going to go into load preset, slang shaders, and CRT. And this time we're going to choose a really intensive CRT shader called CRT Royale. These are going to really tax the CPU, and given the fact that the Beetle Saturn core is also very demanding, it's always nice to see how far we can push this device. So not only are we playing a hard system to emulate with a hard to play core, but we're also using one of the hardest shaders to run as well. And sure enough, my iPad is so powerful that it can play this no problem, and this is pretty awesome. So this really replicates that old CRT feel if you want to play a retro game like this. And to give you an idea of just how powerful this iPad is, if I turn on fast forward, it goes up to 180 frames. So this is running at a 3 times speed, but with all those parameters added to it as well. And given the fact that this is one of the harder Sega Saturn games to emulate, I'm pretty confident in saying that all Sega Saturn games will probably play as long as they work with the emulator. It'll obviously depend on the device that you're using, but I'm really impressed with this performance right here. Okay, last home console system to test is going to be PlayStation 1, and these games are all going to run just fine. I do recommend adding that BIOS file just to make sure you have the best compatibility, but overall, yeah, all these games are going to work. One thing you can also do within the PCSX rearmed core, which is the one I prefer, you can upscale the graphics. And it's a very similar process to what we already did with Nintendo 64 and DS. So we'll go into the quick menu, then core options, and now we'll go into GPU plugin. Here you have 3 options that all say enhanced resolution. I recommend turning on all 3 of these. This will essentially double the resolution, so it's not going to be like a full 1080p or something like that, but it will upscale all of your 3D graphics, so games like Crash Team Racing are going to look awesome. Alright, and the last system we're going to test here with the iPad is going to be our arcade systems. I saved the best for last. And here you want to choose your game and start it up. And make sure that when you add your ROMs that you're using Final Burn Neo ROM sets. If you try to use ROMs from a different ROM set like MAME or something like that, chances are it's not going to work. So make sure you use Final Burn Neo arcade ROMs. And once you've got a game started, you press the select button to insert a coin. It feels like I'm rich every time I do this. I can insert as many coins as I want. I'm just throwing these quarters in here for free. And this by far is one of my favorite ways to play arcade games. Most of these will run in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which means they're going to fill up the entire screen of an iPad Pro. It looks amazing. And so if you have an iPad with a 4:3 aspect ratio like this, I think you owe it to yourself to at least install RetroArch and Final Burn Neo. And one of the great things about RetroArch is that it's very easy to use local multiplayer. All you have to do is set up a bunch of Bluetooth controllers, and then once they're connected and you start up a game, RetroArch will know that and then put them each to a different player. And so you can play with 2, 3, even 4 players depending on the game and what it supports. Now another type of arcade game I really love are vertical shooters, and you can play this in a vertical mode as well. To do this, we'll go into the quick menu and then core options, and then there's an option for vertical mode. And if you turn this on and then go back into the game, it's going to flip it over on its side. So now you can rotate your screen and it's going to fill up the whole thing, and it's amazing to be able to play these vertical games in a vertical orientation like this. Anyway, I spent a lot of time talking about the iPad just because it's a really great way to demonstrate each of these games, but everything that we've done so far in this video can also be done on an iPhone the exact same way. The only main difference is you're going to have to hook up a controller either via Bluetooth or a telescopic one like this. This controller is called the Backbone one. It's the PlayStation version. It's white. I think it looks really nice. And essentially all you have to do is just wrap it around your controller. It's going to plug in via USB-C, or you can get a Lightning version if you'd like as well. However, of note, this one doesn't work well with most iPhone cases, so you often will have to take your phone out of your case to use it. And also this controller is a little bit expensive. It's about $100 if you don't find it on sale, and so it's quite expensive, but it is pretty nice quality. I've been using these for years. Now, if you have an iPhone with a USB-C connection, another controller I recommend is this one. It's called the GameSir X2S. This one has a little bit more of a blocky feel, but it's really easy to get set up, and yeah, this one's a lot of fun too. The great thing about this controller is that it feels sturdier compared to the Backbone because it's basically just one big unit. In addition, it's a lot cheaper. You can usually find it for about $40 or $50, so half the price of the Backbone one. Either way, if you are interested, I will leave links to all the controllers that I tried out in this video in the video description so you can check them out. And really, that's about it for this startup guide for RetroArch on iOS. Now, I realize this is kind of a long video, but it's always required with RetroArch to make sure you get the best settings. And like I mentioned, I have full RetroArch guides on my website as well as on this channel. And so if you want to dive deeper into this, getting into things like core overrides, stuff like that, then I would recommend checking out those different guides. But as it stands, I'm super excited that we have RetroArch on here. Not only does it expand the amount of games that we can play, but I love the amount of freedom that we have when it comes to configuring each of these systems. This allows us to add shaders and cheats and upscaling and even adjusting the video settings as well. And I love the amount of tinkering we can do within RetroArch. So even though, yes, it's a bit of a beast to actually learn how to use, I think it's well worth it. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions down below. It always takes me a bunch of time to put these guides together, but there's always something that I miss here or there. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.